Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to this week's Talking Heads podcast. Private pensions, paying for parking, and the success, or otherwise, of regeneration were all up for discussion on the programme. And that regeneration work is where we'll start. Here's Stu Peters with more.
Has the regeneration programme in the Isle of Man been a success? Major works get underway in Castletown and Ramsey today as part of the drive to breathe new life into the island's town and village centres. The £8 million pot initially set up has been used, and more money was set aside to fund plans already on the table. The works in Ramsey are set to transform the market square in the town, and the work completed so far has been credited with attracting new businesses to the town already. As we've heard, the other town where work starts up again this week is Castletown. Has the work carried out under the banner of regeneration proved successful, do you think? Should more money be allocated to continue with the works around the island's towns and villages, or should a line be drawn under the idea now? Let's go to the lines and talk to Harry. Hello, Harry.
I think they need to spend more time on regenerating Douglas, really, to attract tourists.
The place would grind to a halt if they closed any more of the footpaths and things and the shopping streets.
Well, I mean, yeah, I know I was down Strand Street yesterday and there's about a dozen workmen down there working, but if they want to bring revenue into the Isle of Man, they just need to do something with Douglas and get it back to the old days like Blackpool or whatever you like, you know.
So you think that the money should be spent on Douglas, get the shop window of the island sorted first?
Well, we've done all the thing with Callow's Yard, the heart of Castletown and everything like this, and it hasn't worked, you know. And I mean, Douglas is the capital now, so if they want to get anything moving, it needs to be here. You've got a Department for Policy and Reform. It needs reform in Douglas. They need to understand what reform means, you know.
The only trouble is that if anything's ever done, every time a shovel's picked up in Douglas, people in Ramsey and Castletown and Port Erin complain that all the money always goes to Douglas and that nobody else gets a lick of the spoon.
I know, but if they realised just what it would mean if they did get more people coming to Douglas and they wouldn't be having to charge them for toilet tax and all these sort of stupid things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, all right, Harry. Thank you very much for your call. Let's go up to Ramsey and have a word with Wilf. Hello, Wilf.
Now, I've got you down, Stu, as a kind of a half-intelligent sort of a fella.
Only half-intelligent?
Well, we'll see just now.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a question. You see if you can answer it for me, because nobody else can. Okay. It's a very simple question.
Go on.
Now then, if you're driving down Ramsey Quay, when usually the whole quay is full of cars parked.
Yes.
Then you get to the marketplace, and it's completely full. No spaces. Now then, what's the risk regeneration supposed to be for? It's to attract more people to the town.
Yes.
If the car park is completely full now, and you're going to disrupt everything for months till you do all this regeneration, and you're going to end up with less car parking spaces, how does that bring more people to the town when you've already got it full now?
I've got the answer to your question, Wilf. It's a long game, and you're going to have to take a little bit of pain now for 6 months to resurface it or whatever they're going to do with the marble slabs or whatever.
Right, okay.
But long term, it's going to be better for the town.
But wait a minute, hang on. The car park was already full. So where are you going to put the extra cars that's going to attract, this thing's going to attract?
All right, Wilf. So, you can please some of the people some of the time. Some texts and things. When times are tough, then investing in the island's infrastructure is a good strategy. It gives a jobs boost and benefits all. Job creation has to be the key for the island's success, so let's all get behind regeneration. There you go. Finally, somebody who's got something positive to say. Thank you. I wish you'd put your name to that so I could congratulate you. Dave called. I live down in Castletown at the square. It looks like it's going to be all pedestrian. Really? So that's 15 parking spaces lost. That would be a mistake, Dave, wouldn't it? And Costa's opening, which means opposite the police station, 9, maybe 10 spaces will be lost there. It's all right saying that there are places for workers to park, but come 9 a.m. when everybody's parked up and gone to work, any new visitors to the town will drive in and leave again because there's nowhere to park. We heard earlier from Owen Collister, Chairman of Castletown Commissioners, but he's on the line now to talk to us. So good afternoon, Mr. Collister.
We had 4 weeks ago a whole afternoon with 3 commissioners and the architect in the town hall and in the square, asking anybody to come and look at the final drawings and in the order which we would be doing the work, starting just past the co-op, working up the footpath towards the Isle of Man Bank and then off to the Union Hotel. And then we would work all in sequence back down towards the castle. Now, hardly anybody came that afternoon, and it was a great disappointment. A lot of the things could have been explained that day to anybody that would have come to the town hall. And this is not the time now to complain, but it is the time to think that this job has got to be done, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. That will take place.
Sure.
But we have made provisions.
All right, Owen Collis, Chairman of Castletown Commissioners, thank you very much indeed for calling today. Let's stay down in the south and have a word with our friend Dave in Ballasalla. Hello, David.
You put a lot of money into regeneration or whatever, but it is the cleaning up afterwards. It is keeping the cleanliness of the towns and villages. And the obvious answer in all these cases is cleanliness, bins, which you cover regularly, being emptied, people getting out, keeping their hedges, keeping their vegetation cut back.
Yep, I absolutely, Dave. I need to wind it up there because I'm completely out of time. You're right. I mean, you wouldn't buy a new car and expect it to look great after a year if you've never washed it and you've never cleaned the inside out, and that seems to be the analogy.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
The LegCo elections, or more specifically, the election process, took centre stage on the programme on Tuesday.
Is it time for radical reform of the Legislative Council election process? After 3 rounds of nominations and elections and more than 20 separate ballots, the 2 remaining seats in the upper chamber were finally filled yesterday. David Crentney and Bill Henderson were elevated to LegCo in March, but it took 2 additional rounds of voting for MHKs to agree on who should fill the other 2 vacant seats. But the drawn-out process has been criticised after the sitting. Chief Minister Alan Bell says he was dismayed by the whole process.
Personally, I think this has just been an embarrassment for the House of Keys. We have a statutory responsibility to elect members to LegCo. Whether we like the process or not, the House of Keys voted for it. They voted for also changing the rules a few years ago about the voting mechanism. One, I have to say, I voted against, and we're now paying the price for it. I hope, though, at last we've got this fiasco out of the way and we can get back to delivering the public services and the support for our community that we're here elected for. But it's been a very sad day, again, I think, for the Isle of Man and the electoral process. And I hope before long we can come up with a new process, either a reformed LegCo or a new electoral process which will avoid this ever happening again.
Chief Minister Alan Bell, is reform now essential? Should the ballot be an open one rather than secret? Should MHKs be obliged to elect members at the first round of elections, or should they have the right to reject all of the candidates put forward? Oncan MHK Peter Cairns' LegCo reform bill is due to be debated again next week. It was delayed from today's sitting to allow time for amendments to it. It would see public elections for MLCs. Is the idea of having the upper chamber elected by the public the best way forward? This from William. He says, Stu, folks are so appalled by the self-serving fiasco that was the LegCo elections that they're calling for a national boycott of Tynwald Day. Our national holiday is normally regarded by most of us as a celebration of our democracy, something it's impossible to applaud in these dismaying circumstances. Thank you, William. Hey boy, yet another example of the All Boys Club for those who stood no chance of being re-elected in the next general elections. Shame on the pair of them, says Frank. What do we think about the whole thing? And let's go to the lines and talk to our friend Jill. Hello, Jill.
I may be cynical. Stu, please.
Sorry.
But I don't think anybody with the slightest hint of a legal background stands a snowball's chance in hell of getting in.
Well, it would seem not, certainly.
Well, you know, they don't want to be pulled up, do they?
Do you think that's what it is? Because we had, a qualified advocate standing a couple of goes ago, and then we had Michael Moyle, former Deemster. He was standing this time, wasn't he? And he eventually withdrew, I think. So 2 people who you would have thought would be perfect to scrutinise legislation.
That's the trouble. That's why they weren't chosen.
Do you think so?
Yes, I do. I'm sorry. And it should be publicly elected. But I have my doubts about the turnout.
Yes.
Because they're not exactly rushing to the ballot box in the general election.
Yeah. I have concerns about that as well because, public elections, these things tend to turn into beauty contests, don't they? And the people who look best and, make the biggest promises tend to get in, whether or not they've got any way to perform as they say that they're going to perform is a different thing altogether.
Yeah, and you'll thought. I thought it was quite an interesting point, but surely if you stand for MHK, isn't it a voluntary thing? I know you get paid, but...
Well, I just wonder whether or not it should be made into a fixed-term contract, because that would solve part of this problem, wouldn't it? In that, if you need people for the Legislative Council, the people who are already sitting as MHKs, and I've got a number of texts and emails from people who say that this is seen as the soft option for people who aren't going to get back in at the next election. So with a year to run, you shouldn't be allowed to stand, I don't think, because, what will it cost to have by-elections?
Far too much.
Well, considering that we're skint, it seems to be a frippery that we could do without.
Yeah, well, this is it, isn't it? They've got money to spend when they want to.
Or even say, all right, well, we'll not replace these 4 MHKs because we've got a general election coming up. That might be the other way to do it. Of course, it means that those areas would be underrepresented then, so I don't know.
You can't win.
No, whatever you do, you can't win. All right, Jill, thank you for calling. Derek called. I feel very strongly that nobody from Legco should be brought down to serve in the Chief Minister's cabinet or any other senior position. They're elected to scrutinise, not to govern. They haven't been elected by the people. Okay, well, that's a view that I've heard a number of times, and I can't say I disagree with it. Good afternoon, Stu. Recently I wrote to you saying that a population of 80,000 people doesn't need an upper chamber, elected or otherwise, and that most MLCs are toadying sycophants who are elevated to such a position, as it's clear when they face the electorate that they'll, in all probability, be voted out. Nothing seems to have happened in the last few days to have dissuaded me from this opinion, says Richard. OK. We have a highly paid civil service plus 24 MHKs, including an unofficial opposition. Do we need Legco, says Tom. Therein lies the question. Do we need Legco? I honestly don't know whether we do or not. If MHKs stand for MLCs, they should show some honour for a change and resign their seats first. In my view, it shows contempt for the people who voted them in otherwise, says Cliffy. Yes, I think you're right, Cliffy. I don't think you can have the safety net of knowing that if you don't get in, you've still got your stipend as an MHK. I think if you want to stand for MLC, you should have to resign your seat first. That's if you're allowed to resign it at all. I think it should be a 5-year fixed contract where you're not allowed to do something else. Stu, agree with you. They should stay the 5-year term. What a shock. What a result, says Eileen. It's a fix. Let us put them in, not MHKs, says Roy. OK, Roy. I'm sorry to say now I have little faith in the majority of our politicians, says Skell in Port St Mary. And don't talk about having Tynwald experience. They're the ones who've let us sleepwalk into the trouble we're in today. It's an old boys club. OK, well, I'm not commenting particularly, although, and I know that I'll be in trouble for siding with the government, I have to say that this present administration has probably had more problems to try and resolve than any government in the last 30 years in the Isle of Man. I would think the VAT bombshell when it first started, 2007, 2008, I think that that's been the biggest challenge that any government's had to face in living memory. And so, I'm not suggesting that they've got it all right, but they've certainly had the work cut out, I would think.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Why is the Isle of Man sending a delegation to an inter-Celtic festival in Europe? And who's paying for the trip? Those are questions which were asked on the programme last week. And this week, Director of Culture Van and Prisha Madrell joins Stu in the studio to explain.
A delegation from the Isle of Man will be travelling to Brittany in August to take part in Europe's largest inter-Celtic festival. Performers from the island travel to the event annually, but this year marks a special year for the Isle of Man as it shares the status of honoured nation at this year's festival Inter-Celtique Lorient with Cornwall. 100 musicians and dancers will be travelling to the region to represent the island and showcase what the island has to offer culturally. But why is the festival significant, and just who is covering the cost of the trip? Brescia, somebody got in touch a week or so ago about this and said, I've heard that they've chartered a jumbo jet or whatever to take, and it's all coming out of the taxpayer's pocket, and, what we're doing, spending all this sort of money when we're skinned. And then I think somebody sent a text saying, no, all the people that are taking part are paying their own way, effectively. So that was kind of the end of it. Just put the record straight about how this is funded.
It's an absolutely huge festival first. It's about 800,000 people over 10 days. And whenever you tell people that, they scale it back to 80,000 because they sort of think about the population of the island. So it's a huge festival in Brittany, and they have a huge budget, and they cover most of the travel and accommodation costs as well. So we do you, as Culture Vannin, are putting some money in as well. So Isle of Man Arts Council, so local businesses as well. For example, the Steam Packet are helping out with some transport as well. So it's a real team effort.
Yeah.
We've got different departments who are helping with the promotion of food and drink, as well as promoting tourism, the Isle of Man as a destination, and Isle of Man as a place to do business, as well as a place where the creative industries are huge and where we've got fantastic place just really to share with everybody.
Okay, so sponsorship then, and people throwing money into the pot is the way that this is being funded rather than directly by the taxpayer.
Yeah, and Culture Vannin is a charity that receives some money from government, but most of its money comes from lottery funds as well.
Gotcha.
So this is going exactly where it should be, which is for the promotion of Manx culture. It's giving performance opportunities to a lot of young people in particular, associated with Russian Silver Band, with Nefani Dance Group. And so it's for a whole host of people to really push, to really shout about how wonderful our culture is, how wonderful the Isle of Man is. It's like a trade fair. It's having a 10-day festival where the small Isle of Man isn't small anymore.
Yeah.
It becomes really, really prominent. It's one of 8 nations. And this year, there are 2 small nations who are going to be the biggest nations there. They're featured. And it was a huge opportunity, and it's something that we're all working together to make happen.
Brisha, you say that there's a lot of media interest there, and Phil said that there are going to be lots of journalists there covering the event. I mean, are you able to pre-brief them? Because somebody sent me an email only today or yesterday about, I think, a Financial Times article that said that one of the problems with the Steam Packet is that we're on the south coast of England, or the east coast of England. So, I mean, still, even people in England don't know where the Isle of Man is.
You're exactly right. And when I went to university, everybody was convinced that I lived on an island with a large prison, and it was the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
And wasn't the weather good?
Yeah.
Exactly. We've had the opportunity, because we're one of the featured nations, to invite top level journalists who wouldn't normally want to come here and to interact. Then they've just been this weekend. So we've had 3 TV journalists from France 3, and we have had large regional newspapers, West France and Telegram. And we've also had, funnily enough, the French equivalent of the Financial Times, Les Echos. It was a way for them to discover what the island is, and they're going to be starting to write those articles now in the lead up to the festival. Over 325 journalists at the festival. Millions watched the events on television. They put a live broadcast out of the parade. So the TV crew that was over followed Russian Silver Band and Nefani Dance Group. So they were getting the behind-the-scenes shots with them. And then they'll put out a programme, which will probably be about an hour before the parade is broadcast live. And then they have these fantastic stadium gigs, these Nuits Interceltiques, and it's just pipe band, dance groups, huge extravaganza ending with fireworks, and that's televised too. And I think there's about 2.5 million people watch that on TV. So the opportunities are there, and they're layered, and they're going to come from now until after the festival as well.
And it's not just the French people who are going to be exposed to the Isle of Man, it's everybody that goes there.
You get journalists from across Europe, British Isles, Ireland as well.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast, featuring highlights from the programme over the past week. Now, who should pay for parking? It's something that was up for discussion on Thursday.
Should higher earners in government pay for parking when they go to work? It's almost 3 months since government staff and Tynwald members were supposed to start paying for their parking spaces in Douglas. But that's still not happening, as the plan has been put on hold pending a further review. It was part of a larger package of cuts and charges which the Department of Infrastructure has been trying to introduce to meet its budget targets. Those measures include charging school children for bus travel to and from school, introducing paid-for parking on the promenade walkway during the winter months, an overall increase in vehicle duty of 10%, and changing the eligibility for free bus travel for senior citizens. Many of those charges have already been brought in, but the charges for government staff and politicians is still proving a sticking point. Catherine Nicholls been speaking to DOI Minister Phil Gorn.
I'm quite determined that I announced a package. Either we do the whole package or we don't do the package. Well, 90% of the package has now been introduced in terms of the unpopular charges. I understand that senior civil servants and politicians won't particularly want to pay any extra, but £200 for a parking space, it doesn't seem unreasonable to me.
Now, this was brought forward, as you say, as a package of measures. It involved a lot of increases to the public, but it was sold almost to the public on the basis that it would create a fairer system for all. But that fairness hasn't been brought in. I mean, we've had a lot of comments from people saying, I don't mind paying more as long as it's across the board and everybody pays. How can you justify stalling the system here when the charges, as you say, for the public have already been brought in?
Well, I don't justify it. In my view, it should have been introduced on the 1st of April. That was what the department had proposed to do. Now, I do know that there are clearly bits of work that need to go on. There were issues in terms of who would and wouldn't pay. I mean, quite clearly, we weren't targeting people who were on lower incomes. It was more the senior level people that we felt could afford to pay. So I know that there have been various sort of bits of discussions between the different departments as to who should pay for what and what will and won't happen. But it does to me seem as though it's taking a little bit too long now, and I'm hopeful that the right result will be delivered fairly soon.
So you've essentially at this point reached stalemate?
No, I wouldn't say stalemate. There are still ongoing discussions, but I've made my views very clear on the topic. I don't believe that you can, on the one hand, announce a package of very unpopular measures and then choose to pull the one measure which would have affected politicians most directly. I think that would be an extraordinary thing to do.
Minister for the Department of Infrastructure Phil Gordon speaking there to Catherine Nicholl. Should government workers and politicians be charged for parking when they go to work? Well, I'm ashamed to be even asking the question because, by any judge of what's right and what's not, then yes, they should. I'm convinced by that. I don't think there is any argument against it. If we're asking people with disabilities to pay for parking where they didn't have to do, if we're paying for working people to pay more for everything, then absolutely the politicians and senior civil servants should be paying. These people are all on north of £50,000 a year, some considerably more than that, and yet they're getting free parking as a perk. Of course they should pay, and they should pay the market rate. Then we are all in this together, says Rob. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I'm sure that the Chief Minister, every time he hears a story like this, winces because, he said famously some years ago, well, we're all in this together. And yet, every time the politicians are asked to contribute towards something, they'll find some sort of a way of getting out of it, or that's how it feels anyway. We all know how important perception is. The perception certainly is that they'll try and wriggle out of it. Senior civil servants try and wriggle out of having to pay a penny more than they absolutely have to. And how is it that they're able to do that? The rest of us can't say, no, we're not going to pay it. How can they say that? Somebody called and said, I think half the problem with this is that there are so many workers in the private sector who get free parking. I've just come back from Guernsey where parking is free for everyone with disc zones in places and no road tax. But the shops are busy. Parking charges are stopping people from coming into towns and spending money. It's not just government. Should anyone pay for parking? But if free parking is part of their employment contract, then there's no way that they'll be able to get them to pay. Interesting. As a civil servant, I am required by contract to provide a car for my department's use. I'm out several days a week, but not all. My department pay the DOI £1,200 per annum for a space in Finch Road car park. It seems inequitable for the DOI to charge twice for the same thing. I'm not senior civil service or manager, but I'll be charged. The policy does not apply to teachers who, according to the DOI, are a special case. Why? How many other public sector workers are exempt? Quite happy for those who drive a desk and don't go out to pay, as it's a benefit in kind. Are NHS staff and bus drivers exempt as well? Right, well, OK. I suppose that's a different way of looking at things. Who on earth is running this island, the civil servants or the MHKs? If it's the civil servants, why are we paying MHK's salaries too, says June. Is it me or does this smack of Animal Farm? That's from Smee. It absolutely smacks of being very Orwellian, this. What did they say on Animal Farm? All animals are equal, except the pigs, who are more equal than anybody else. Numerous employers who have parking spaces at or near the buildings who don't charge their employees to park there. Some have contracts with Chester Street and Shaw's Brow, and any number of these are not charged to the staff. I've heard of an ex-bank employee who continues to get free parking at Chester Street even after retirement. Really? Sounds like your correspondents are hitting out at government employees specifically just out of spite and without knowing what's being provided elsewhere, says Jenny. I don't think that's fair, Jenny. I mean, I think most of us are pretty reasonable about this all in it together thing. And if it's my car tax has gone up horrendously because I've got a big engine in the car. It's gone up horrendously over the 5 years that I've owned the car. And I kind of don't complain too much about it because I think, well, the country's skint. The Isle of Man's skint. We need to make money wherever we can. So if this is my bit towards helping that, I don't mind so much. But if I was finding out that civil servants or politicians were getting free road tax, for example, I'd be most aggrieved about it.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
The government's new digital strategy was endorsed by Tynwald this month. But just how are concerns over potential breaches of personal data being addressed?
Our studio guests are the Director of Government Services, Mark Lewin, Chief Executive of the Manx ICT Association, Kurt Rosen. A concern that an awful lot of people have got, especially when we're talking about sensitive information, income and health and things like that, that could end up, in the cloud somewhere, is access to it. And not just in the Isle of Man, where we've had problems recently with the income tax division, but in the UK, people leaving, briefcases and hard drives and pen drives and things on tube trains. What sort of security can people expect if we go for a completely digital future? Mark?
Thank you. So we have to recognise we are there already. Any business that deals with citizens has clear responsibilities for the protection of that information. Government's one stage further. Often citizens don't have a choice, and as you say, it's very sensitive. So right here, right now, today, we need to make sure we take absolute clear steps to protect that. It's about our people. So everyone in government has a responsibility for information security, whether it's paper-based or electronic. It's about our processes and how they come together to further protect that whole organisation, and it's about the technology as well.
Yeah.
So it's something that we absolutely don't take lightly. We have people that are employed just to help us constantly improve that and check it, but it is an obligation that we all share in terms of government, as do anyone in any business, to make sure that information is protected. The digital strategy recognises that even without this, it's inevitable we will be holding more information. That's the way it's going. And we need to constantly be making sure we're holding it as secure as possible. We are, particularly where there's consent involved, that consent is clearly there. Strategies work best where people do have a choice to opt in or opt out. So if we look at the way people will buy goods online, if there is a problem, you'll opt out. But as I said before, government, often the citizen or the business won't have that choice. So it is incumbent upon us to make sure that people can trust, and we have to work hard at that. One of the things in the digital strategy, one of the actions is it's called Island Shield, and it's focused on recognising what Kurt said before, that as an island we have an aspiration to be a very digital island. That means our economy will have lots of ICT focus. We have critical infrastructure, we have government itself, and the Island Shield is all about bringing together a number of things that are already happening in terms of security, in terms of awareness, and can we bring that together more strategically. So the strategy gives us a place to say, let's strategically take that forward.
I mean, Kurt, let's just bring you in on this discussion, because, what Mark says is reassuring to a point, and I'm sure that when these data breaches happen, it's not done on purpose, it's a mistake. We are humans interfacing with computers, and humans are always going to make mistakes. How do you minimise that?
One thing that's very interesting, if you look at it from an enterprise perspective, with breaches of data, 80% of breaches of data that do exist around the world are caused by people and processes.
Yes.
They're not actually caused by technology.
No.
So actually bringing people and processes into this and saying you've got a responsibility, you have to do things in a certain way is part of that. But I think sitting outside of government and looking at the way that they are at the moment, the fact that there are multiple copies of the same data in multiple places being handled by multiple people increases the risk.
Yeah.
And actually bringing some of that together in a strategy which says part of that is very specific about how we look at data, and then being consistent how you apply that is a way to mitigate it in a large sense.
Well, I think I said on the programme a while ago when we were talking about this strategy, and somebody raised the problem of security and information getting into the wrong hands, and I made the point and said, well, that could have happened any time in history, because the wrong pieces of paper might have fallen into the wrong hands.
Absolutely.
Purely by mistake. And then somebody said to me after the programme, well, yeah, but it's just one button press now, whereas in the past, somebody would have had to have taken a suitcase full of documents out of the place. So, in this case, the digital technology is working against us, because it makes it too easy to disseminate a huge amount of information quickly.
On the flip side of that, if you're looking at manual mistakes, if you like, where the data is being leaked just because someone does an error, as you say, with no malice at all, then systems, particularly if you centralize those, can mitigate that. They can put those checks in, those checks and balances. So there is a case for looking at it from both sides. Yes, if you make a mistake, it can be much bigger because it can get out there much quicker. But the technology itself can help to audit you and make sure you do things in the way that you're supposed to.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should people in the Isle of Man be given the same pension freedoms as those in the UK? Michael MHK Alf Cannon thinks so. Treasury Minister Eddie Tear disagrees.
Sweeping changes to pension rules, which give savers much more control over their money, came into force in the UK in April. The shake-up was one of the previous coalition government's biggest reforms, allowing people who've saved up for a pension to do what they want with their money. It means people who are retiring no longer have to buy an annuity to provide a fixed regular income. And now Michael MHK Alf Cannon wants the same changes brought in here.
We've had these Pension Freedom Day on the 6th of April 2015, as it's been called, where pension savers in the UK have been granted almost complete freedom now to their pension funds, or much greater freedom to their pension funds, including the ability to withdraw the pension fund. What I've obviously established is that people on the Isle of Man do not have those same freedoms at the moment. We've obviously got our own pension legislation over here, and that I've been contacted by one or two residents so far who've been wanting to access their funds along the lines as is now stipulated in the UK, to find out that they can't. So I welcome these reforms. I think it's a positive step forward for people who've worked hard during their lives, who've committed to saving private pension funds. I believe these same freedoms should now be available to people on the Isle of Man.
So does Treasury Minister Eddie Tear think following the UK would be a good idea?
I don't think so, and certainly experience in Australia, where the so-called busting of pension schemes has been enforced for a long time, has shown that it does have its downside, because you have some people who haven't acted wisely and prudently, spent the money, and now so they're coming into their later years and they've got no means of support, so they have to fall back on the state. So I don't think that people should, in effect, feel that no matter what they do, there's a safety blanket there for them. And the other side of the coin is that a pension is intended to provide an income in retirement, and in my point of view, that purpose should be maintained.
Should the Isle of Man follow the UK in giving people more pension freedoms, or should the system here stay as it is to safeguard people from themselves? That's the question. Let's go to the lines and see what Chris makes of this. Hello, Chris.
I'm not at all convinced by Mr. Tear's argument in this matter, and I'm just absolutely surprised that the government just haven't for once gone along with the UK laws on this.
Well, you can see instantly where he's coming from. What he's saying is that if people are allowed to take all the money out at 55, then they could spend it unwisely and then have to throw themselves on the mercy of the state. He's hoping that people are going to invest this money in an annuity or something like that, get a private pension, and that means that they're going to be less of a drain on the state, taking out what they're entitled to. So I understand it from a fiscal point of view. From a moral standpoint, it's your money, you've paid it in, so surely you should have the say over what you do with it.
Can't see what he's imagining is going to happen, that someone's going to spend all their money. Well, they're going to have a state pension anyway. I know it's not going to be a big pension, but they're not going to be out on the streets because they've done too much buying Ferraris and all the rest of it. So I think Treasury, and particularly Mr. Tear, have thrown themselves off on a tangent here. For what reason, I just don't know. Now, speaking personally, ironically, I transferred, when I moved back to the Isle of Man, I transferred my pension to the Isle of Man. I wanted to keep it local, thinking I was going to do some help to the economy, and also thinking I'd have some sort of flexibility with the pension. Now, quite the opposite has happened.
Yes.
And this making the Isle of Man a very unattractive place for people to come and retire.
Well, people who've got a private pension, I would think so, yeah. Thank you very much for calling, Chris. Nice to hear from you. Stu, if there was ever a time when the Isle of Man should just go along with UK laws, it's now. I don't want Mr. Tear controlling my life like one of the grasping bank managers from the film Mary Poppins. Good luck to Alf Cannon in Tynwald on Tuesday. That from Albert. Thank you, Albert. Somebody else called. When it comes to safeguarding people or giving them more freedom, it's a no-brainer. Of course they shouldn't be given the choice. What? Sometimes you need to protect people from themselves. please don't suggest for a second that I need protecting from myself by the state. Just look at the calibre of MHKs they elect when they're given a choice. Well, yes, we need someone to protect the people. At least the officers in the civil service will do that. Do you think? I think it should not be cashed in as a lump sum. It's a pension and a safety net for your old age. Many people use income support because they don't have an adequate pension, which is expensive for the government purse, as it is if you have a pension, it should be drawn monthly, which is less stress on government coffers. Some people would just spend it in one go as a lump sum, says Anne. Yeah, but it's your money, Anne. I think we've got Ian on line 3. Hello, Ian.
You're saying that about 25%. Now, it isn't. It's 30% on the Isle of Man, which I have actually done. I opted out of the state secondary pension when I was 39. I should never have done it, and I wouldn't advise anybody to ever go down this road. And when I became 60, I got a letter to say that I needed to put this money into, and I think it's an annuity. I'm not very good on these things.
Yes.
Now, so there was £9,000 came out, and the rest of that money went into an annuity.
Yeah.
And I can tell you now, that pays me less than £1,100 a year.
I know, yeah.
I have to pay a financial advisor.
Oh,
I think it's 1%.
Yeah.
And I have to pay the insurance company. And now I can't swear to this, but I think, I'm going to look this afternoon, I think it's £600 a year to administer it.
Everybody gets a lick of the spoon, and the person who's actually put the money away, gets very little out of these annuities.
On a lighter part, I've said to some friends that I had to name 2 people that should I cock me toes up, they would then come into what was left in my pot. I'll have to live till I'm about 110, and if I don't, they will make more money than me.
Yeah, it's crazy,
it's a damn disgrace.
Thank you very much, Ian. Let's have a look at some of the comments that we've got. Let them take all the pension out, then they get no state pension. Easy, says Dave. Bob called, yes, people should be allowed to draw it out. The current system only benefits the insurance company, not the person who paid in. I had a small one, says Bob, and if you work out the years for payback, I'd have to live to 96 or 97 to actually benefit. When people retire at that time of life, people should be able to do what they want. If they want to go on a world cruise, why not? And if people are happy to spend the money and live on the state pension, which they've also paid into, then let them. Bob, you've just perfectly said what I feel about this, I think.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
That's it for the latest look back at some of the highlights from Talking Heads. As ever, our thanks to everyone who took part in the programme. And there's a chance for you to get involved each weekday by calling, texting or emailing between midday and 2 p.m. If you missed the programme, you can catch up on each day's programme in full using the on-demand section on manxradio.com. And the website's also where you'll find a daily update of the topics up for discussion. You can also keep up to date with what's on the programme by following Stu Manx on Twitter or liking the Facebook page. That's Talking Heads with Stu Peters. And if you'd like to carry on the discussion after the programme finishes each day, the Facebook page is the place to do it, as long as what you post is within reason. And if you'd like to suggest a topic for us to discuss, get it to us by emailing talk@manxradio.com. But that's it for now, so until next time, goodbye.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.